Good morning. This webinar offers closed captioning. To enable closed captioning, click on the live transcript button on the bottom of your screen and choose your preferred method. Welcome to the Chicago Department of Business Affairs and Consumer Protection webinar. Please note any website or email that I mentioned will be posted in the chat box. For those seeking business licensing assistance, you can visit the Small Business Center at City Hall or call 312-74-GO-BIZ. Also, business licenses can be applied for or renewed online at chicagobusinessdirect.org. If you are part of the BACP Entrepreneur Certificate Program, you can get credit for joining this webinar by sending an email to bacpoutreach@cityofchicago.org. If you want to learn about the program, please visit chicago.gov/businesseducation. Also, this webinar is being recorded and will be available at youtube.com/ChicagoBACP. I will post the mentioned information in the chat box. We encourage attendees to ask questions. Please use the chat box to send your questions. There will be a Q&A session at the end of the presentation. Please note that the views, information, and opinions expressed during this webinar are solely those of the presenter and do not necessarily represent the official policy or position of the Department of Business Affairs and Consumer Protection or the City of Chicago. Today's webinar will be State of the Restaurant Industry, Trends and Best Practices for Operators. It is being presented by Hudson Reilly, Senior Vice President, Research and Knowledge Group with the National Restaurant Association, and Sam Toia, President and CEO of the Illinois Restaurant Association. Hudson?
Good morning, everyone. On behalf of the National Restaurant Association and its research group, it's a pleasure to be able to talk to you about the current state of the restaurant industry, and most importantly, how we see the industry proceeding over the next few months and well into 2023 as well. So hopefully you can see my screen now. And when you think about the restaurant industry, it really, of all the industries in the United States since the onset of the pandemic, was the industry that was most severely impacted in terms of sales and employment declines. So here we're just looking at monthly census information about sales at eating and drinking places, and that's about 70% of the industry. And you can see on the far left-hand side, February before the pandemic took hold, and then the rapid plunge in sales down there to just 31 billion a month. Then the gradual build out through the summer of 2020, then the impact of the different variances. And if you look over on the far right-hand side, you can see that basically so far in 2022, the restaurant industry has posted 5 consecutive months of sales gains. Even when you take away the effects of menu price inflation, it is a directionally correct trend for the industry, but do keep in mind that we're now, in essence, almost 2.5 years since the onset of that pandemic. Most importantly, from the restaurant industry is that the pandemic changed dramatically how restaurant operators conduct their business. So looking at on-premises restaurant traffic by meal occasion here, the top line there in blue is dinner, the red line red, and the green line is breakfast. What the important takeaway from this slide is that even after this duration of the impact of the pandemic, on-site dining traffic for the United States is still substantially depressed compared to where it was pre-pandemic. And so that's not surprising considering the amount of closures as well as the on and off regulations regarding on-site dining across the different municipalities. But this is quite representative of what has gone on with on-site dining traffic in the United States. Now, conversely, look at what's gone on with off-premises traffic. And off-premises, we say includes takeout, delivery, drive-through, and curbside. So if you look at the off-premises traffic, exactly the opposite has occurred with what happened with the on-premises traffic. So for each of these three meal occasions, the proportion of American adults that are using off-premises in their daily lifestyle has increased. And so thinking about what the pandemic did, it fundamentally altered how the industry conducts its business. And, you know, we're frequently asked, when does the restaurant industry get back to normal? And the answer is essentially that it doesn't get back to normal. It gets back to a different operational relationship than it had with the consumer pre-pandemic. And in many ways, the pandemic accelerated many of the underlying trends which were present in the industry before the pandemic actually started. So looking at restaurant traffic and what's gone on with this on and off premises switching, pre-pandemic, even then, over 3/5, 61% of all restaurant traffic was off premises. And most recently in June, 77%. So you can see that's a 16 percentage point increase over this 2+ year period. So not surprisingly, during the depths of the pandemic, that ratio approached 90%, but it has backed down. And, you know, is it ever going back to 61%? Pretty unlikely. Will it ebb down from 77%? Yes. And most importantly, looking at that off-premises growth, looking at those three different components, carry out, drive-through, and delivery, you can see that the real beneficiary in this off-premises market has been that drive-through. And that's not surprising considering the contactless nature of drive-through. And it's a trend that many restaurants heretofore that were only on site are now exploring the ability to offer drive-through concepts. And delivery, you can see delivery gets a lot of attention, and rightly so, but still in terms of traffic, it's just 9%. But of all the components, it is still the most rapidly growing segment of that off-premises market. But the fact is, when you look at the portion created through drive-through and carry-out, that certainly is the lion's share there. Also, too, the reason that off-premises market has been able to grow and maintain its operational dominance has to do with the rapid integration of technology in the restaurant industry. So if you look at all restaurant ordering before the pandemic, just 5%, that number in the top line there under February 2020, 5%, in other words, just 1 out of every 20 restaurant orders was digital. Latest data shows that it's 15%. So that's a pretty substantial increase. But during the depths of the pandemic, it was roughly 20%. So at that point, 1 out of every 5 restaurant orders was digital. And it does vary between whether one's looking at quick service or the full service segments. But for full service operators, notice that even digital for them is 11%. And not surprisingly now, it's not uncommon to have major multi-unit national operators that report sales of off-premises accounting for 30% plus of their total sales. So the one thing that pandemic did was really focus table service operators on the importance of that off-premises market. And many of them did make rapid pivots and innovative operational changes to garner more of that off-premises in the full service market. So there's a saying in the restaurant industry that demographics is destiny, and that's certainly true. Because historically, when you look at growth in the restaurant industry, it's very closely correlated with population growth and employment growth. So when there are areas that have gains in population and employment growth, that generates income growth. And that income growth is very closely correlated with restaurant sales growth. And that makes perfect sense. But the one thing the pandemic did was scramble the pie as to where the different demographics are located. And so what happens when the pandemic hits? There's a rapid outward migration from these city center areas of consumers to the more suburban rural locations. And not surprisingly, some restaurant operators did follow that migration outward. And perhaps one of the most important questions facing the industry and society today is, how does that remigration occur and where does it occur? Because prior to the onset of the pandemic, over that prior decade, one of the most important developments for the industry was the growth in employment in these city center areas. And so as a result of that, with that outward migration, even with the hybrid work model, say workers come back 2, 3, 4 days a week, it means that that traffic level is much harder to get back up to those pre-pandemic levels. And some of this is what we call redistributive, and some of those restaurant meal occasions are redistributed out to the suburbs. But in the end, looking ahead, what is evolving is that among the 5 traditional business days, Monday through Friday, at this point, it's looking like Tuesday is the heaviest traffic, followed by Wednesday, Thursday, and then Monday, and not surprisingly, Friday is the lowest out of those 5 days. And one of the interesting things that's become apparent about this remigration pattern is that it's pretty closely correlated with commute times. In other words, the city centers that historically have had longer commute times for those workers are the ones that are showing lower occupancy levels during those business days in those city center areas. So this is obviously in flux now and will continue to play out over the next couple years. In terms of restaurant operators and their current challenges, for decades now, the association has surveyed monthly hundreds of restaurant operators. We ask them a whole host of questions. And one of the most interesting is what their top challenge is at that point in time. And so you can see recruitment and retention of employees is certainly among the operator community, that top challenge. Rapidly rising is food costs and availability, not surprisingly, and next comes the economy. So recruitment and retention, a lot has to do with availability of that labor pool. It can vary dramatically by geographic areas. But the fact is the restaurant industry has been and continues to be a very labor intensive industry, even with this integration of technology. So what goes on with labor force participation rates, this remigration becomes critically linked with how restaurants that are located in city center areas can staff up. And not surprisingly, there are roughly 11 million job vacancies in the United States currently. There are dramatic differences among the different industries. You can see the hospitality, which includes restaurants there in that bottom right-hand corner, that gray piece of the pie, currently has 1.4 million openings. It's the 3rd largest vacancy following professional and business services. And that would be, for example, IT, security, eco-friendly positions, followed by healthcare. And so it used to be, in terms of labor competitive situation, even pre-pandemic, recruitment and retention was a high priority issue for the industry. But the pandemic really has tipped that balance into, there are operators that obviously report now they are limiting hours, they are limiting days a week because the labor is unavailable now to staff up to the higher consumer demand. So in terms of restaurant industry employment, as I mentioned earlier, it's the industry most impacted in terms of declines at its depths. Roughly about 6 million individuals in the industry were unemployed. That has come back, is now down to 635,000, but that's still down over 5% compared to its pre-pandemic level. And, national employment now is actually above where it was pre-pandemic. So this labor challenge and the ability to recruit and retain is paramount for the industry to grow sales moving forward. And not all restaurant segments are equally impacted by this employment recruitment challenge. What you see here are the different segments of the industry. On the far left is full service, where there's wait staff usually in these establishments. And you can see that the red bar represents the jobs that have been regained, and the blue bar was the original loss. Table service employment still remains down substantially, and it roughly accounts for about 80% of that employment loss in the restaurant industry. And quick service, in terms of total employment, has almost recovered. And then in the middle there, you can see the snack and non-alcoholic beverage bars. And that segment actually has more employees now than they did pre-pandemic. So in terms of the geographic differences in terms of restaurant industry employment, these states just look at the different declines and increases, and you can see the wide geographic differences between how restaurant industry has recovered over this 3-year time period. And looking at what's going on with labor cost as a result, not surprisingly, the industry really has a double whammy at this point of not only increased food costs, but the rapid growth in labor cost as well. And you can see on the right-hand side there, the historic annual growth in hourly earnings, and then what happens there in 2021 and 2022. And it is moderating a little, but there certainly is a lot of time needed to pass to bring down this rapid growth in employment. And this is why not only restaurant profitability is under much more dramatic pressure now, but if you think about how the industry deals with not only this increased labor cost, but the lack of availability. And that's why you are seeing more integration of technology into these operations. And when we talk about technology in a moment, you be able to see where this technology is occurring. So in terms of the food cost situation, you can see the blue bars are the annual increases in menu prices. The red bars are the annual increases or decreases in grocery store prices. And you can see in the far right-hand side what has gone on with food price inflation. Now, 7.1% for the restaurant industry, that's the highest rate since 1981. But the grocery store price inflation is substantially higher than menu price inflation now. So from the operator community, that does help a little in terms of how consumers view the price paid for value received for at-home versus away-from-home meal solutions. And basically, in addition to what's gone on with menu prices, part of the reason, in addition to labor, that menu price increases had to be so substantial is what's gone on with wholesale food prices. And it is a situation where you can see, back in 2015, 16, 18, wholesale food prices were actually deflationary. So this has really increased the pressure on operators to deal on a long-term basis now with these rapidly rising food and labor costs. And so not surprisingly, what you see are new business models evolving in the industry which have an entirely different income flow than from a traditional restaurant. And so you've probably heard of some of these, the ghost virtual kitchens, which are basically restaurant without public access. And so there is a greater utilization of these new concepts, and they are entirely new business models with entirely different income statements and balance sheets, and are definitely a long-term trend, not a fad. And so looking at that food price, this just looks at these are USDA estimates of annualized growth rates in the different commodities. And you can see that they are quite substantial, double digits in many cases. And so what this has done is put the operators in a situation where they have had to redevelop and streamline their menus to deal with not only the higher costs, but some of the supply chain challenges as well. And as the restaurant operator community knows well, their food cost in many instances is directly related to a very specific commodity price and how that commodity price proceeds. So as makes sense, if one is a steak restaurant operator, it's an entirely different situation than, say, being a pizza operator, because the input costs for those menu items can vary substantially. And another agricultural food cost challenge is what's going on with the drought. This isn't new. It's just so long and so sustained that it's actually realigning how different commodities are grown and produced in these drought affected areas. And so from the operator community, traditional suppliers in some of these areas, they have had to look for alternative sourcing. And it is a situation that once again has been a long time in the making, but is having a real time impact upon the restaurant community. So looking at technology integration in restaurants and why it's important, it's for all intents and purposes, there are three primary areas of integration for restaurant technology. And that would be the front of the house, which the customer sees, the back of the house, the prep areas, and then through the smartphone app avenue. So consumers want to see more technology used in restaurants. They expect it, particularly the younger age cohorts, but it isn't a lot of sophisticated stuff they're using. In other words, just basic stuff, looking up locations, directions, hours of operation. And when we talk to restaurant operators, we emphasize how important it is to have that information correct on those search engines in real time. Because even though it's a competitive industry, it allows that consumer, if they are disappointed by finding the operation closed on a certain hour or day of the week, or a whole other host of different online important demographics, they can be quite quick to vote with their feet. And so the expectation now is that that information is correct. It's important to have staff dedicated to making sure that information is correct. Also, the digitization of restaurant menus, a lot of that was driven by the movement to digital ordering, but it has resulted in menu simplification and the ability to make sure that information is correct in real time on a restaurant website or smartphone app is critical. Also, to look at the bottom four, which all have to do with how essentially that restaurant meal solution is ordered and paid for. So the pandemic obviously increased that focus on touchless experiences, but you can see by the numbers that the consumers really have become quite familiar at using these new ordering and payment vehicles. And so if the operators are investing more in technology, here you can see that since the onset of the pandemic, their top investments have been in the apps, in the QR codes, followed by the development of contactless payments, and then payroll software and reservation systems for sure. The ordering methods vary dramatically by different age groups. And so the expectations and usage of restaurants varies substantially among these different age cohorts now. And this slide we put in just to show you how even among millennials and Gen Zers, there's substantial differences in how they use technology to order. And so you can see the baby boomers there on the right, and obviously they are the least among the age cohorts likely to use these new ordering technologies. But the millennials, you know, are heavier users of apps and websites, but the younger age cohort thinks nothing of ordering by text message now. So it is a rapidly changing and developing situation and will continue to be so over the years ahead. And even in terms of service at restaurants, we just asked consumers whether they, preferred to sit in the section where they get traditional service, or would they like to order and pay using a tablet or smartphone? And, 2/3, because socialization is a very important driver of restaurant sales, particularly for table service. But the reason this slide's in here is to emphasize the dramatic differences between the older age cohorts and the younger ones in terms of how they want to be served in a restaurant meal solution situation. And it is essential now to understand that these younger age consumers expect to have technology integrated into their basic restaurant experience. So to wrap up, in the end, we're all fortunate to be allied with an industry that consumers want to use. They definitely want to spend their dollars in the restaurant industry. A lot of it has to do with essentially the restaurant foods have flavor and taste sensations that they can't replicate at home. There certainly isn't that cooking and cleanup use of leisure time required. And also societally, there's been a fundamental shift towards consumers looking to spend their dollars on experiences versus physical items. And particularly among younger age groups now, you can see the essentiality is extremely high for those younger age cohorts. The pent-up demand for restaurant meal solutions is elevated compared to pre-pandemic. You'll notice here, those blue bars are on-site pent-up demand or unfulfilled demand for restaurant usage. And you can see for table service, it's still elevated compared to where it was. However, with the greater usage and reliance on those quick service and particularly off-premises meal occasions, that pent-up demand is actually lower now than it was pre-pandemic. In terms of operator sentiment, with the threat of recession and inflation, you can see there in April, it started and moved up those yellow bars, expecting worse conditions 6 months out. But even though, particularly in certain markets, it's still a tough slog, in the end, the consumer wants to use restaurants in their daily lifestyle. In terms of the macroeconomic indicators and where we see that going, you can see here real GDP for this year. We're looking for essentially many of these indicators to moderate next year. Particularly DPI, the reason that's negative this year is the lack of stimulus payments compared to the prior year. And inflation, obviously, 4-decade high rate, we do see that coming down to probably the 3 to 4% range next year. And employment growth will continue. So overall, the 2023 outlook is more moderate economic growth overall than this year. So the industry definitely does remain in transition. To wrap up, there are essentially and importantly very strong geographic variations. So this year, economic growth has definitely moderated, with inflation being the very critical issue from the consumer ability to spend. But the industry has demonstrated resiliency not only during the pandemic, but over prior historical challenges as well. So 2023 economic growth is going to be even more moderate. And operationally, definitely much more emphasis on that off-premises market, delivery, carry-out, drive-through. The ability to now include alcohol in some of these off-premises orders that varies dramatically by different geographic locations. The rapid development of new business models, a sustained focus on cost management. And from the supplier community's perspective, they are stepping up what are called value-added products, which essentially just means that that labor is moved off of that restaurant's site and down the supply chain. And then the greater emphasis on digital ordering and the digitization of many of the processes. And it's important to understand that the technology from the consumer standpoint is definitely supported in many instances. And over the long term, the industry will continue to grow, but at the moment, it is still dealing with that challenge of digging out of that huge hole created by the pandemic. So that concludes my presentation, and thank you.
Great, thank you so much, Hudson. Turning it over to Sam.
Okay, again, I'm Sam Toia, President and CEO of the Illinois Restaurant Association. As Hudson highlighted, restaurants overall are on a steady path to recovery, but it's still a very difficult time as many face 2+ years of debt, higher food costs, supply issues, and staffing challenges. Everyone is encouraged by the warm weather, more outdoor dining, more tourists in Chicago throughout Illinois. With the return of the James Beard Awards in June, Taste of Chicago, Lollapalooza, and other summer festivals, local restaurants are seeing a boost in sales with increased tourism. But even during normal times, every dollar that comes into a restaurant, 95 to 97 cents goes right back into food costs, staffing, and everything else that goes with running a restaurant. And these are not normal times, not quite yet. The Illinois Restaurant Association continues to support restaurants in every way we can, whether that is securing new grants, sharing updates, helping connect them with employees, providing training, and everything in between. Everyone is adjusting to the new normal and finding ways to fully emerge and stay in business. We recently partnered with other business groups on a campaign called Chicago Returns Week, a celebration of downtown employers, employees that have returned to the office with events, special promos, etc. The reality is that a full return to office isn't going to happen overnight and likely will never be the same. We're hoping that after Labor Day, we see more people coming back to the offices. Many restaurants and bars downtown are reevaluating their operations, exploring new ways to be profitable. Catering, private lunches, happy hours, and various partnerships with businesses. Unfortunately, there are no simple solutions to staffing shortages, but many restaurants are offering higher wages, healthcare, wellness benefits, faster check payments, family leave, and more to attract team members. It is a complicated issue, and it's a very competitive market right now. We also lost team members to other industries while we were shut down on a limited capacity over the last 2.5 years. As long as we stay on a steady path to recovery, we'll be able to rebuild our workforce in time. In the meantime, everyone is doing what they can to operate efficiently, support their team members, and stay in business. The IRA is working with the National Restaurant Association to pass a workforce development program to create pathways for workers to come to the United States through a 3-year visa program to work in hospitality and other industries. We recently co-hosted a hiring event called Hospitality Hires Chicago with the Chicago Cook Workforce Partnership. To date, the event has helped over 1,000 people get jobs in hospitality. The Illinois Restaurant Association Educational Foundation provides scholarships, job placement, and more for the future leaders of the industry. We are also partnering with the HOPES program, which trains and places returning citizens in jobs. Restaurants here in Chicago and across the state have had to adapt to market conditions and changes in consumer behavior. There's a greater demand for delivery, carryout, digital interface, outdoor dining, social media presence, and chef-driven restaurants, to name a few, as Hudson also pointed out. Third-party delivery services do provide a valuable service for restaurants and for diners, but often there's a huge amount of room for improvement in how delivery services work with restaurants. We've now passed a state legislation to require consent from a restaurant before a third-party delivery service delivers their food. So it will prevent hijacking of restaurant brands. We appreciate the state for taking action to help restaurants protect their brands and businesses, and the city for acquiring fee transparency rules and temporarily capping fees over the past 2 years. The IRA has hosted a number of resources available on our website, IllinoisRestaurants.org. I encourage you to visit it. Again, IllinoisRestaurants.org. We host bi-weekly seminars in partnership with the Cook County Small Business Source on topics relevant to operators and upcoming trends in the industry. The Chicago Gourmet, which we got coming up on the 4th weekend in September, is the nation's premier culinary festival spotlighting Chicago's world-class dining community. Chicago Gourmet is held from September 22nd to 25th, 2022 at the top of the Harris Theater rooftop at Millennium Park. I say this is the best food and wine show in the country. I don't care what they say in South Beach or Pebble Beach. We have the best food and wine show right here in the city of Chicago. And we're looking forward to a great event this year. We have Tacos and Tequila presented by U.S. Food and hosted by Chef Rick Bayless. We have our Hamburger Hop presented by Buckhead Meat and Blue Moon, hosted by Chef Stephanie Iser. And our Late Night Gourmet presented by Tao Chicago. We have our Psalm Session presented by Southern Glazers and Wine and Spirits. Grand Cru presented by United Healthcare and Lexus. And new in 2022 is Prost in the Park, presented by Performance Food Service and hosted by Chef Sarah Grutenberg. Prost is our gourmet take on Oktoberfest with classic German delights, Oompa bands, fun cocktails, and more. Tickets are available at chicagogourmet.org. Don't wait, tickets are going fast. Again, as Hudson said, these are not normal times, but hopefully 2023, we will get back to normal times. I'm open for any questions now. Thank you.
Great, thanks so much, Sam. If anyone has questions, if they could please put them in the chat. First question, can you elaborate more on these new business models?
Hudson, do you want to take that? All right, well, I guess maybe Hudson's not still with us, so I'll
no, Hudson's muted.
Yes, as Sam was saying earlier, a typical restaurant has a pre-tax, pre-pandemic profit margin of just 4 to 6%. And during the pandemic, of those operations that have survived and are still in existence, it's not unusual for them to have a pre-tax profit margin now just depressed down to around 1%. So what that means is that for many of these businesses to remain viable over the longer term, they are having to develop new mechanisms for revenue development. And so that can be, for example, the ability to develop restaurant meal kits, the ability to add alcohol to existing off-premises order, the ability now to expand and utilize outdoor dining that has proved exceptionally popular with the consumer. And it's quite clear that their sentiments going forward support more outdoor dining options. And so consequently, that traditional model where when you added up food and labor, which historically took up about 2/3 of the restaurant sales dollar, that has escalated so dramatically that these businesses have to look at, in essence, re-engineering, not only financially, but also in terms of operations, to adapt to this new environment on a longer term basis. And so if you look at, for example, you can take a business model such as a virtual kitchen, ghost kitchen. That income statement in terms of occupancy costs, in terms of labor cost, and even sometimes in terms of food costs, is entirely different than a traditional restaurant business model. And so the industry, if you look at all food spending in America, pre-pandemic, over half of all food spending was allocated towards the restaurant community. And obviously that has changed as a result of the pandemic, that greater focus on retail. But as you can see from the consumer sentiment, they want to use restaurants. So operators are being pretty inventive and widespread in terms of how they look to change their existing business models to tap into this new operating environment.
Great, thank you. If there is any other questions, if you could please put it in the chat, we'll give everyone about a minute or so. Again, if you could, 3-year visa, elaborate.
Sure. So we've been talking with Senator Duckworth about getting working visas for hospitality workers like they have in the past with farm workers. The National Restaurant Association, we're working with them as well, because as we all know, there is shortage in the hospitality industry for workers, just like there are in other industries like transportation and healthcare. So we are communicating with our elected leaders, from Senator Duckworth here in Illinois to Congressman Chuy Garcia and Congressman Mike Quigley as well, of trying to get these working visas. You know, again, we have talked with people in the Biden administration. To get there, we would need to get some Republicans on board. Obviously, they're having labor shortages in Texas and Arizona and Florida. It would be great if we could get Senator Cornyn on board of Texas. I think we could get that moved. If that, we could get, a visa, working visas moved. If we could get some Republicans on board. Right now, as you all know, it's very divided in DC. So we're in the red zone, but we are not in the end zone now of getting working visas for hospitality workers. But there is a lot of communication going on.
Great, thank you. Next question. How do these trends vary by race, ethnic segments?
Hudson, I'm giving that to you.
Sure. I mean, when we talk to restaurant operators, we emphasize how important it is for them to know the demographics of their trading area. And obviously different areas have different demographics. But the fact is, regardless of the demographics, essentially consumers want to use restaurants. And so the ability now to use census and state data for operators to know the demographics, say, for example, a 1 to 2 mile radius around their current site or a site that they're considering, is critical. Because in the end, particularly for certain menu themes, the alignment with the different demographic characteristics, for example, household income, the propensity to spend at restaurants versus retail. It's a whole bevy of different indicators that can give a operator in their existing location or contemplating a future location an idea of how well that concept aligns with the restaurant wants and needs of that certain trading area. But in the end, all restaurant sales end up being local. And, the one differentiating aspect of our industry compared to other industries is that the restaurant industry is actually embedded in every community across America. And that restaurant community reflects the different demographic variances and the wants and needs of those different groups.
Great, thank you.
Restaurants are the soul of every neighborhood throughout our country.
Definitely. Can you tell us how many restaurants have closed during the pandemic and how many new restaurants have opened, both nationally and here in Chicago/Illinois?
Well, we know over 100,000 restaurants have closed nationwide. We don't have the exact numbers of how many restaurants have opened. Maybe Hudson does, but we know throughout the country, close to 100,000 restaurants did close during the pandemic. Possibly BACP might have numbers exactly here in the city of Chicago as we move forward here with getting business licenses. But there's definitely been a substantial number of restaurants that close. But restaurant owners, operators are type A personalities. And I'm sure as we move forward into 2023, we'll see a lot of these restaurants that close will have new restaurant entrepreneurs opening new restaurants because that's the type of industry that it is. So we are on a path to normalcy, but again, it's still a rough path.
Great, leading right into the next question. What are some out-of-the-box innovative ideas that operators are using to bring in customers?
Hudson, you want to take that?
Sure. I think we've covered some. In other words, that integration of technology, of using that technology to very specifically target and promote and nudge that consumer into the decision to patronize a certain concept or a certain business becomes very important. In other words, that fragmentation of these markets and the ability to use that technology through loyalty systems, through this communication now to remain top of mind, because as Sam well knows, has been and always will be an extremely competitive industry, and the ability to use these new technologies in the marketing and advertising and communication medium is very high. The streamlining of the menus is very important now. The ability to focus on certain signature items and promote that both on site and in the virtual world is critical. Certain aspects in terms of different demographics, for example, younger age groups are much more focused on eco-friendly and sustainability in restaurant operations. And so in terms of operators communicating with them, what they're doing currently is very important, particularly if their target audiences skew younger. And then the idea now that menu pricing is dynamic, and obviously, particularly in this time of high menu price inflation, the technology now allows operators to change their pricing by not only day of week, but time of day now. So they have the capacity, as airlines and hotels have had for many, many years, of changing that pricing to not only shift demand, but increase additional demand because it's very easy in real time now to communicate out those pricing changes.
Great, thank you. Another question. Restaurants are optimizing technology use. Is that a positive increment of revenue for businesses that assist restaurants to make the improvements of technology?
I would say yes. Any way you can improve is important to restaurant owners, operators, as both Hudson and myself insinuated. 95 to 97 cents of every dollar that comes in goes right back out the door. So any way you can help the bottom line, which technology is very helpful to the restaurant owner operator. So yes.
Great, thank you. There are any other questions, if you could please put them in the chat. We'll give that another minute, give people a little time to type. It looks like that is the last of the questions. I want to thank both Hudson and Sam. We really appreciate you taking your time out of your day. Such great information for our restaurant industry, and wishing everyone a safe and healthy weekend. Enjoy the weather, guys. It's wonderful out.
Thank you. Thanks for having us.
Thank you again.
Bye-bye.